Hello, and thank you all for checking out the longer version of my conversation with parishioners at Bellarmine Chapel. Um, and I just, just to start us off, could we all just briefly introduce yourselves and share what you're doing right now, or if you're still part of Bellarmine Chapel?
Sure. I'm Tim Severin, the Director of Social Mission for Bellarmine Chapel. Been there a little over 5 years and have worked in immigration most of the time that I've been there.
My name is Dan Hartnett. I'm a Jesuit. I was pastor of Bellarmine Chapel at the time that we sponsored the Murchie family, and I am now at Loyola University in Chicago.
I'm Chris Schroeder. I'm a parishioner at Bellarmine, and I've worked with the Murchie family. I actually lived very close to them, but I've had to move recently, but still see them a lot.
I'm Sally Evans, a parishioner at Bellarmine Chapel. I got involved with the immigration committee right before the Murchies came, and have been involved with them as a family all that time since their arrival.
Great, thank you. Well, here's my first question for you all. How did you get the request to give posadas to the Murchies family?
Dan, do you want to start?
Okay. Well, I would say the first request came through Pope Francis. I don't mean directly. I didn't get a letter or phone call from him, but his example inspired us to do something, albeit partial. He showed us when he came back from some difficult situations of migrants and refugees, he sponsored a few families. And he said, after doing so, I don't have a recipe for a complete solution, but I believe each one of us can do our part. And watching him, hearing him, inspired us to take a step. And of course, I was aware of the good work that Kino Border Initiative had been doing for a long time, the Jesuits in California and the Mexican province, that joint project. So that was what gave the original initiative for this effort.
And we'd met with Joanna from Kino Border several times in advance, and we're sort of on cue to host a family when they identified one that was willing to move to Cincinnati. So we got the call from them in the summer 2017, and then quickly put in place the different pieces we would need to have them come up with us. They joined us in September 2017.
That's awesome. And for folks, if you remember, yesterday's video of the Posadas was highlighting Kino and the great work that they have been doing to give Posadas to a lot of asylum seekers that are at our U.S.-Mexican border. As you all received this request, did your parish discern whether to give the Murchie family Posadas? And if so, what came up during that process?
I would say that first, Tim and I began to talk about this possibility, and we talked it over with the staff of the parish. But then we quickly decided that we wanted to bring the entire parish into the discernment process. Mm-hmm. So I spoke at all of the masses and gave a brief outline of what would be involved, and but asked the parishioners to write an email back to me indicating whether or not they thought that was a good idea, a viable idea, or not such a good idea. Mm. And I'm happy to say that all I got were positive thumbs up from the parishioners.
Right, and I would add that part of that discernment too had been going on for more than a year prior, when we created the immigration team that Chris and Sally are part of. We had been doing some work with families locally, and had some sense of what was involved in that. And so this sort of, we through that discernment as a team, this felt like the best next step for us to really embrace that share the journey call that Pope Francis has.
That's beautiful.
And I think too, Dan, you brought this up at the beginning, was the word encounter. We need to encounter to make changes.
In addition to Pope Francis's Share the Journey campaign, ISN had the campaign for hospitality at the same time. And so that too was sort of an inspiration for us working with asylum seekers. We wanted to be a model of hospitality and just create a space of welcome for people who had in so many ways felt unwelcome.
And I would say that I think initially, in terms of our expectations, we really wanted to help this particular family. We felt that it was our responsibility to help, albeit partially, to do whatever we could for the sake of this family that had been in harm's way, for sure. But as often happens with gospel initiatives, you end up receiving much more than you give. And I think one of the things we quickly discovered is that this family was a blessing to the parish, and it redimensioned, I would say, Tim would know better than I, the immigration work of the parish. I mean, that it just grew exponentially.
Right. And in my time with the parish, I was just going to say, in my time with the parish, it's by far the biggest positive response we've seen to any social issue. It was just this overwhelming outpouring of time, talent, and treasure to build this mutual relationship with the Merche family.
And was this all part of what you expected from that experience? Did you all expect to, what I'm hearing is a lot of the gifts that you all received, but was that part of what you were expecting when you took this on?
I think I'd like to say that we all had it planned out, but in honesty, I think a lot of it was just gifts that we discovered along the way. First of all, people like Chris and Sally and so many others devoted incredible amounts of time to working out the details of housing, education, healthcare, the list. It involved many more dimensions than we probably anticipated initially, but that's fine. Everything worked out. People stepped up to the plate. But then Tim was just amazingly creative at organizing these dinners with parishioners where not only the Merches, but other immigrant families were able to tell their stories. And at each of those dinners, Tim invited a different batch of parishioners. And I think many of those parishioners had really kind of a conversion experience at that dinner, hearing the stories of these migrants that sometimes we really don't know what they go through. And it's easy for people to take a position for or against immigration. But once you hear the story or have the encounter, as Sally said, that changes everything. So we had all these transformations taking place in our parish as a result of those dinners.
I also think that politically it was a time when immigrants were being called illegal and other names that shouldn't have been used. And I guess I felt like I wanted to know the difference there's a difference between a refugee, someone who's seeking asylum, who's fearing for their life, for their family. We need to understand that there's real reasons for them to come. And I think with meeting the Merches and the other families, it's just been a blessing. Like Dan said, to hear their stories, it's like nobody would want their family to have to leave their country. They don't want to leave their family. They've left family behind too. and it's traumatic.
And I think it was something positive people could do too. It was, like you said, Sally, kind of a hard time for our country, and we can't change big policy, but person to person, working with people, and the justice issue of it, how can you not respond when you hear their stories? And I even remember, this is maybe going back, but Father Dan talked about this at the masses and said to email him, but the other parish staff and Dan were in the back church, and people were just offering and being excited even then, before you had said yes. So people are good and want to help, I think. And it's an open road. I don't know what to expect, but meeting good people.
There was something very concrete, I think, about adopting or sponsoring this one family. It cut through so many of the ideological issues. So often happens. There's nothing like a concrete face, a concrete story to cut through all of the fog. And then, but what helped later on too, we realized it was important for people to be more informed in terms of the complexities of immigration. So Tim organized a parish retreat. I'm not sure if the topic was, I can't remember if it was hospitality or immigration, but we gave there were different speakers there, including Tim, that really gave a much deeper appreciation to all the parishioners, to maybe about 100 parishioners that signed up for the retreat, to understand the complexity of immigration.
Yeah, I think I was struck just the way that justice and solidarity just sort of kept feeding into one another. We came into this from that, like several people have said, from that space of justice. So we saw this abuse happening at the border, this criminalization of people, and we wanted to do something. But solidarity with the Merches meant much more of a relationship than we were looking for that. But I think we were all struck by how impactful that was, how much it hit our hearts, right? Like over the last 3 years, we've certainly laughed together, celebrated joys, even a wedding. But we've also cried together, and that experience of just being with one another, belonging to each other, being in community, I think has transformed us in a pretty radical way. Me personally, for sure, but I think our community as a whole.
Early on, I think with you, Father Dan, mentioned all the kind of preparation that went on before the merchants arrived. You spoke about kind of the little details. Could you the little details of housing and schooling? Could you talk a little bit more about that? What all came? What were all those details, and how did you all go about that?
Well, for one thing, Bellarmine Parish is blessed with a host of very competent, well-connected people. So, for example, in the housing, we're right away young couples who they too had children. They stepped up to the plate and they offered housing for this family. And we thought, at least for the first year, it would be good for them to live with a family as opposed to getting them an apartment for them to live alone. So they lived in the basement of this generous family for about a year, I believe.
No,
was it longer than that? Maybe
no, less than a year.
Less than a year.
They moved out in February or April, I think.
And then they got their own place.
Yeah,
Sorry.
No, and then we took everything else step by step too, right? I mean, like when they got sick, then we had to say, okay, now what do we do in terms of healthcare? And we would get healthcare assistance from them. We have several doctors in the parish that assisted us in that regard. And Tim would know, Tim had a better handle on all the details, but everyone did their part, I would say, right?
And the family spoke Spanish, so that was really helpful too.
That was huge.
Right. I think we did as much planning as we could together, right? We had a team that welcomed them in advance, trying to look at all of the different dimensions that Dan mentioned, but inevitably life is more complicated than we expect it to be. So I think just having some adaptability and being able to respond as issues arose or as needs arose on both sides, I think it led to a deeper relationship in some ways too.
What do you all wish you had known before giving posadas to the merchant family?
I wish I had known Spanish. That would have helped a lot.
I think it was kind of nice not knowing too much, and trying to. It was a surprise. It was a road full of surprises, and I think that was good. I don't think we got the sense that we were in charge of this, but somehow it was like grace unfolding midst. For example, the wedding that Tim referred to, it just seemed appropriate. They never were able to get married. And so they were able, we had this most beautiful, most moving marriage I've seen. Wouldn't you say? It was just a beautiful ceremony. Here, this couple that had been through literally a war together. I mean, war and violence all around them. Somehow they made it all the way up to this country, and they're finally able to formalize their marriage. It was a very, very, I'll never forget the hug that they gave each other after they processed in individually. They just held on to each other for about 10 minutes there. It was very, very moving.
In some ways that we didn't know all the answers to. They didn't, and we didn't, and it was more of a connection in a way. I don't know.
It's true.
I just had one experience like that. The first year I took them around to see Christmas lights. I didn't speak any Spanish. They didn't speak any English. Barclay said, that's all I know is the word no. But there were oohs and ahs. So last year I took them around again. And Barclay said, do you remember the first year that we went and looked at lights? He said, that's all I could say was no. And I said, yes. The joy that we all had, we could share that together, even though we didn't speak the same language. And so there was that commonality for all of us. And it's just a loving, for all they've been through, their children are happy, the parents are happy. I mean, it's a very happy, joyful family. I'm just so impressed with them. And
we laugh and have fun together too. There's like jokes from the past. Like they had 5 turkey dinners, I think, the first year. And so then we thought they didn't like turkey. Well, and this year, I find out they really do like turkey, just not too much of it.
5 days in a row.
Right. Yeah, and the first dinner I had for them was this chicken that didn't turn out right at all. And I was so embarrassed. And I didn't even have the words to try to explain. So that is a big joke. I mean, they admit they didn't know what to do either. And it was fun.
Great. You know, the hope that we're hoping that our conversation today, that folks who have been participating in our virtual Posadas campaign, is that especially those who are parishioners at a parish, for them to see how they could do this themselves, how this could be something that them as a parish, they can embark on this journey. And as many of those who are participating, they have learned about MPP, the Migration Protection Protocol, or Remain in Mexico, and that policy has been a deterrent to asylum seekers coming and asking for asylum,
right,
or being here in the United States until the remainder of their asylum case. But we hope with a new administration that that policy can go away and asylum seekers can be able to come into the United States while they wait their asylum case. And our hope is that maybe parishioners will be parishes will be able to step up and offer posada. And what advice would you give a parish who is considering giving posada?
So just going through this posada, I'm thinking of the gospel call, "Do not be afraid," and Mary's response of yes. There's a lot of fear that parish and parishioners might feel when they start a relationship with a family they don't know, and our legal system's filled with so many unknowns at this point. But that yes has been a blessing to our parish, and it's been a blessing for the Merche family. And I feel like where God is calling our parish and calling others to respond, to move with the Spirit towards welcome.
And I would just like to reiterate that this is Pope Francis's plan, or I think it was his hope with this Share the Journey effort of his, was that if every parish, just imagine if every parish would adopt one family or sponsor one family, or maybe two or three, we wouldn't solve the entire problem of migrants and refugees, but we would help a lot, but also we would be making, I think, a very prophetic statement of where the church stands.
Mm.
And as Tim was saying, be not afraid. It's sort of a leap of faith, really. You're just an open road ahead. But other people in the parish are praying for this family too, and there's all the support. It's it works out. We're not doing it. God's doing it.
I think also probably the initial request is that all the parishioners bought into this. It wasn't just the staff. It wasn't just Dan who said, we're going to do this, but to discern and to get everybody on board. And people signed up to start driving them places, taking them to Kroger's, we had a lot of people that helped out.
Right. I would say do the planning for sure. Have your team in place. But also be patient with the process, right? When the Merches joined us, we were expecting their case to be resolved within 2 years. It's been pushed back, so there's 5 years before they're even getting before a judge. So that's meant deeper relationships for sure, right? But it's also just meant we have to be patient with the process and be supportive emotionally for them, as that's a long time to be in limbo, right?
Right.
So it's a patient and prayerful process, I think.
Could I just maybe add one thing about advice? I think, if I recall, the most challenging aspect of sponsoring this family has to do with the legal component. In other words, housing is one thing, healthcare is another, education for the kids, food, all of those things are important. But somehow we were able to check them off fairly quickly, I think. Probably the most challenging, it's not necessarily difficult, but it's challenging and it could be expensive, is to make sure that they get some legal assistance.
Right. I mean, asylum is essentially a legal process. So if you don't have that piece, you're limiting the possibilities, right? So getting that piece is important.
And I think it helps those of us who knew nothing about this understand how difficult it is, how much money is involved in getting this asylum. When people say, well, why don't they come legally? Well, if you don't have somebody to sponsor you, if you don't have somebody that can help pay for each step, it's difficult. And I think that was just eye-opening to me.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for our conversation. Thank you so much for the work that you have done. And I hope that those watching get a sense of what it looks like. It truly looks like to give posada to a family, an asylum-seeking family, and the work that goes behind it. It's beautiful work, but at times it can also be hard work.